On this video, I'm joined by special guest Leslie Reyes to chat about late diagnosis for autism. So let's go. Welcome back. So good to see you. I'm Orion Kelly, that autistic guy. I'm all about helping you increase your level of understanding, acceptance, and appreciation of the autistic community. So if that sounds like something you'd be interested in, well, I'd be delighted if you consider subscribing to my YouTube channel. You'll get all the videos, but the most important thing is you'll join the most amazing community you are going to find on YouTube. All right, let's do this. Adults who suspect they may be autistic, or adults who are thinking about tossing up the idea of an assessment for autism, are definitely going to watch this one, okay? My special guest joining me to talk about late diagnosis is author Leslie Reyes. Leslie, thanks so much for being here. Welcome.
Hi.
It's great to see you.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
Just give us a quick little, nutshell for people that are new about the Leslie story.
Yeah, here I am. I'm Leslie Reyes. I'm an author. I was diagnosed very late in life. I was diagnosed when I turned 50. Before I was diagnosed, I had a lot of misdiagnoses. First, it was anxiety and depression. Then it turned into bipolar disorder, then borderline personality disorder, and then histrionic personality disorder, of which my therapists and my friends who knew me for a long time were like, this can't be. It was quite damaging. I mean, I felt terrible about myself. I'm like, what am I, a horrible person? And apparently a lot of women are misdiagnosed. A lot of women on the spectrum are misdiagnosed with bipolar and other personality disorders. When I started to realize I might be on the spectrum, first I had a friend that was also late diagnosed with ADHD, which is kind of a spectrum disorder in itself. And I actually had been diagnosed with that, but I didn't recognize myself as ADHD because it looks so different in women. It doesn't quite look like a little 8-year-old boy running around hyper, eating a lot of candy, or not able to sit in our seats. It almost looks like laziness in women. Like you just get so overwhelmed, you get paralyzed. But it was really when my algorithm, when I was writing my first book, I don't know what it was that I was writing, but even when I was writing it, I started to notice certain qualities of Asperger's syndrome and, spectrum kind of related things going on. But my algorithm started sending me videos and news articles and things about women with Asperger's syndrome. And I was just ignoring them. I'm like, why am I getting all these? Why is my algorithm sending these to me? And finally, I just watched one and I related to it so much. It really... I got emotional about it. It might not have looked emotional when I read it, because, as you know, I have also found, speaking of emotions, that sometimes things don't hit me until later. Like,
yes,
the crisis is happening, and people are getting angry because I don't look like I'm reacting to it at all.
Yes.
And then maybe a day or two later, it really hits you. It would have been nice to know this younger in life, because I would have, I would have made some room for myself, and instead of feeling that I was a damaged person all the time, like there's something wrong with me psychologically, when really it was neurologically. It was that, it's like not realizing you're left-handed and trying to write with your right hand all the time. I actually am right-handed. I'm just, as an analogy, I'm just saying,
no, absolutely.
Do we look at left-handed people and think there's something wrong with them? No, they're just left-handed. That's in a nutshell.
Yeah. It's a big nut. It's a big nut.
It's a big nut.
Don't you think, though, that the more and more you attach yourself to the broader community that we're in, don't you think, though, that you and I find that this is almost the experience of every adult diagnosed late in life? I feel like we're broken, we're bad people, we shouldn't be here, we don't deserve, I feel like I thought that was me, and then I realized, no, it's pretty much everyone late diagnosed. You kind of, because you slip through the cracks, you have this feeling overall that you don't realize they're actually, it's actually as a result of being different, having a different brain. You have this feeling that, no matter what you do, you're always falling short of expectations, and therefore, what's the point? Like, what are you doing here? And you know, one of the most hurtful things that I heard about emotions, which you talked about, I'm the same as you. It can be a real delayed response. I remember once someone described me as a snake in the grass. One of the most hurtful things I've ever heard someone say to me, and it's because they thought, because I didn't really show emotions in the moment, or I didn't really have the ability to provide or share my insights in the moment, that I was therefore purposely and maliciously withholding my emotion and withholding my insights, and therefore I'm a snake in the grass, which is just a horrible thing to say to someone, whether you think it's true or not. But, you know, for me, I thought maybe I am. I mean, you know, and obviously that's not the case, but, you know, prior to diagnosis, you hear these things and you have these experiences, and you start to believe it, right? You just start to believe it. It's got,
and you just feel awful. You know, I don't know if I shared this story with you, but I had a friendship of 33 years that became strained because I didn't have the right diagnosis. So I didn't know how to sort of structure myself in order to avoid getting overwhelmed and having meltdowns. I just thought that was a character flaw. Like, everyone else can handle this stuff. Why can't I? I'm a nurse. A psychiatric nurse. I'm currently not working as a nurse right now. I'm just writing. But one of my last nursing jobs, I was working in a psychiatric unit, and it was really loud, very smelly, fluorescent lights, sirens, screaming, just people screaming all day long. Right?
Wow.
How am I managing this? Well, you know, somehow I'm holding it together. But a friend of mine was supposed to fly out. She lives across the country, and you know, a normal person, like normal, somebody who's not on the spectrum might be able to switch gears, get on the phone during their break and make plans. Well, I was really stressed out, and she was hearing it in my voice, and she was somewhere between offended and concerned, like thinking, maybe I shouldn't come out there. Maybe Leslie's not in the best state of mind to be having guests. And kind of like the more... It became the conversation, which I'm sure you've experienced. I'm not mad. I'm not mad. And like the more you're trying to convince someone you're not angry, the more angry you sound. So she thought she was doing me a favor by not coming out, and she canceled the trip. And I was just left feeling like, oh my God, I must be the worst person in the world. Like, what is wrong with me? Why couldn't I control my temper? You know, I didn't feel angry. I'm not angry with her. But I sure as hell must have sounded angry with her because she canceled her entire trip to come visit me. And for months, I avoided talking to her because I felt like she's in a great place and I'm just a toxic human being. I'm just an awful, awful person. I mean, I felt terrible about myself. Luckily, she reached out to me. Once I got this diagnosis, we had a conversation not too long ago about this. And she was saying, yeah, I thought I was doing you a favor and you felt ashamed. And I'm like, I just thought you were so angry with me and I was a toxic person. And, you know, the last thing you looked so, you know, I'm looking at her pictures online. I'm like, she looks like she's living her best life. She doesn't need my crappy attitude in her life. And it turns out I didn't have a crappy attitude. I was just overwhelmed. I would have handled that a lot different. I would have made sure, hey, listen, I'm going to be working a really stressful situation tomorrow. So let's firm up our plans because I probably won't be able to talk to you after work tomorrow or during work. Now I know that, but there was a time where I felt like that was a shortcoming. Like, why can't I just be an adult, like, and just switch gears and not have a meltdown and get overwhelmed? And that I think is the most embarrassing part of being late diagnosed, is not understanding what those meltdowns are.
What I find really interesting about these things, as you say, is it's the late diagnosis that helps you, but the late diagnosis can also be, I guess, rejected by the people closest to you. They're like, oh, that's an excuse. So you're bringing this up as an excuse. And I'm assuming you've had similar experiences. But with the diagnosis, how did you get it? You said you've been misdiagnosed and you're struggling and you were kind of, you know, almost rock bottom about you as a person, your own mental health. How did the autism diagnosis come to be?
Well, it was after my algorithm basically was like, I think this is what you need. And I just got lucky, honestly. The psychotherapist that I had been seeing for the last 5 years had worked with like she had a history of working with autistic kids, people with Asperger's syndrome. And when I started telling her, look, I I think I might be on the spectrum. I think I might have Asperger's. And she said, what makes you think that? Now, even before the 5 years like that I'd been in therapy with her, I had always expressed to her that I felt like I didn't belong anywhere. And I'd been born and raised in New Jersey, and I moved to California. California in the United States is just a little bit more open-minded about things like this. And I have just always felt like people in California as a culture are a little bit more accepting of quirkiness. So I always felt a little bit more comfortable here. I was born actually in the New York area, which is a little less open-minded. But my therapist had said to me, I have patients on the spectrum with Asperger's syndrome. She's like, they don't feel comfortable anywhere in the world. So she's like, at least you have found a place where you feel somewhat at home, So there was like little things that would come up like that, where I would express certain things, and she started. So when I finally told her, I watched this video about women with Asperger's syndrome. I went down this rabbit hole and was watching all these videos, and she was like, this makes a lot of sense. I then went to a psychiatrist to try to get an official diagnosis. Listen, learn from my mistake. Just forget it. Because most of those tests were made for kids, specifically boys. This one girl, her brother was diagnosed with autism, and she had taken the same test, and she said, I passed with flying colors. I didn't have autism. And she was getting the same borderline personality, bipolar disorder, and she was really suffering. My doctors, again, threw these diagnoses at me, which I had dealt with in my 30s. And then eventually I was just so upset because, if you have the wrong diagnosis, whether it's a mental health thing or a physical thing, if you're getting treated for the wrong diagnosis, you're going to feel worse. If you have heart disease, but you're being treated for cancer, you're not going to get better. You're going to feel worse. No. So it was the same thing with the mental health diagnoses. At some point, I didn't even want to see therapists anymore until I found this woman that I'm still seeing now. She just is a little bit different than the other doctors I had been to. I had changed jobs, and as you know, here in the United States, our health insurance is connected to our job. So I received a new psychiatrist. He was younger. He knew a lot more about autism. When they were doing the intake for me, I mentioned that I believed I was on the spectrum, and he just was like, yeah, that makes sense. They don't really call it Asperger's anymore. It's just spectrum. But I feel like Asperger's kind of really describes it a little bit better than just saying on the spectrum for people who don't really understand what autism looks like. Now, I had mentioned to you, I did find a place that deals specifically with adults who are ADHD or on the spectrum to help with those executive functioning skills, which I didn't even know was a thing. Decades of psychiatric care just making me feel worse and worse. And then a couple months of autism ADHD therapy, and I feel like I am so much more grounded now. I have such a better understanding of why I am the way I am and how to work around it and how to make it even work for me.
The best therapies are practical. So Leslie has proven that. The best therapies are practical therapies. Physio, psychology for me, perfect, right? They help me, my body movement. And okay, the best therapies are practical. Mums and dads or partners, don't send them to acting class to teach them how to become a normal person. That's not going to help. I want to talk to you a bit about your take on Asperger's. But first, before we do that, you mentioned that, you actually kind of put it out there that, women, certainly late diagnosed women or women looking at late diagnosis, beware. And you talked about some issues and barriers. Women watching right now, my story's the same. I went to a psychiatrist. He had no understanding of autism and, said because I looked him in the eye once and I've been to uni, I'm not autistic, right? So I had to go to I found a psychiatrist who was a professor of psychiatry, but also specialised in autism. So, he's going to know what he's talking about. So
right.
the women watching, from your experience, you're telling them two things. One, the key thing is you need to, ask your GP, family doc. You need to find someone who actually is a specialist in the field and not just some dude. Don't just tick the box and get the closest psychiatrist. Yeah. And number two, almost conflicting, you're saying don't even worry about it. So I want to hear your take to the women watching. They're probably a bit conflicted. And the barriers and the hurdles. Let's just quickly dig into that for the women watching.
Here's the thing. I believe that self-diagnosis is acceptable now. So you know yourself better than anybody. And if you've said, okay, maybe I'm bipolar, maybe I'm borderline, and things are just not getting better, you're not feeling better. Trust yourself. And I think that's what I meant by, if, like I had this doctor, he was a little bit older. So, it seems like the younger psychiatrists are a little bit more well-versed in this. When I was diagnosed with these awful, like basically, oh, you're just a narcissist, but here's the clinical word for narcissism. But the whole thing with meltdowns is, I used to tell my doctors, I feel like I'm having a seizure. Like when I'm freaking out like that in front of people, I don't feel upset at these people. I feel extremely remorseful and embarrassed that I'm freaking out. And it was like, it just kept falling on deaf ears. So, only you really know what you're feeling inside. Only, you know your experience. No one gets to tell you what your experiences are. And that was, when they were analyzing my tests, it was like the doctor was making a lot of assumptions about why I had answered questions the way I answered them, instead of asking me why I answered the questions the way I answered them. He said, you answered this because you're this. Oh, really? I'm that?
I think we have to move on because we've got lots of more questions to get through. But I think what I want to say is women are disproportionately underdiagnosed or misdiagnosed. And the current assessment structure is gender bias, and there are many barriers for women. And I think your points are simply put, that it's really important to, if you want the bit of paper, it's really important to find someone who is actually a specialist in the field of diagnosing autism, not just a dude. And also, it's also important to listen and believe, your body.
Yes.
Hopefully I've encapsulated your points there, because I want to move on. And okay, so this is a question that I'm asking on behalf of the people yelling at the computer or writing in the comments. You keep saying Asperger's syndrome. Now, what they're saying is, what's wrong with you, Leslie? We hate that. We don't use that anymore. It's horrible. Why you keep using it? And I say to them, I get to use what I want to use, and you get to use what you want to use, and that's humanity, right? So that's me saying, I'm not saying it to you. I'm not judging you. I'm just being on behalf of them. Okay. Right. So you mentioned too that you thought sometimes it's more helpful for other people to get you if you refer to, if you say like Asperger's rather than say on the spectrum. And there's this whole conversation about, do you have autism? Are you autistic? Are you on the spectrum? So we now know that Asperger's syndrome, if you were diagnosed with that prior to the DSM-5, it was a standalone condition, and that's what you were diagnosed with. Own it. Since then, the DSM-5, if you're diagnosed, they might say, well, you're autistic. They might have called in the past, Asperger's. So for those people listening, what's going on up here when you feel the need to use that phrase, and also you feel more comfortable in that conveying it to others? Are you embarrassed by the autism label?
No, it's not that. It's that particularly here. I know you guys are way ahead of us. You're in Australia. The research, there's so much more awareness. Here in America, we're so behind. And so when you say autism, people immediately think Rain Man, or they think of a 5-year-old kid flapping his arms, or, some stereotypical, high-pitched screaming kid that can't function. And that's another thing with women. We mask really well.
Oh, no, your camouflaging skills and your ability to adapt. But this is the thing, right? So what you're saying is, you say that, and then you're cut off forever. You're ruled out. Like you say in America, I have autism, I'm autistic. And they're like, okay, cool, see ya. You're out, you're gone, you're ruled out, right? But if you say Asperger's, they go...
It's just that they just don't believe it. And I think, I was explaining to someone, I was actually on a camping trip, and I was talking to, it was a retired doctor, and we were talking about spectrum. I like to say spectrum condition, because I don't think it's a disorder any more than being left-handed is a disorder. But we were talking about spectrum conditions, and he was the one to go, oh, you mean like Asperger's syndrome? So the only reason I use that is more to try to get people to understand it really is a spectrum. Just because I look social, I can't tell you how many times I have no idea what the hell's going on socially speaking. Like I'm like, is anyone mad at me? Am I missing it? And I'm just smiling and nodding my head. Because
absolutely. Yeah, no, and I just want to point out too, for people watching, So I'm an Australian, autistic guy, and I make YouTube videos, and people on the planet Earth get to watch them because I don't pick where they go. Okay, so I want to be really clear. If you're watching or you're commenting, you have to understand there are autistic people in every country on the planet. You might not know, they might not know, and you might not know, but every country on the planet has autistic people. Some will never know, some do. So at no point is it appropriate for you watching or commenting to automatically go, Orion's wrong, or Leslie's wrong, I'm right, you're right. If Leslie wants to use this phrase or that phrase, that's because, that is appropriate in her community or the level of things. So I always have to remember, I don't want to preach, because what if I'm a kid in Africa who just got diagnosed and as a result won't make it to tomorrow? Right? There's a difference between community expectations and understandings. Yeah. So, for example, I would say, don't use high functioning, don't use low functioning. That takes
I don't
away
even like that either.
Yeah, but hang on. But this is not about you. This is about the community watching, because people will comment. It's not your responsibility to comment to tell Leslie or Orion what's right and wrong. I'm saying you go with you and I'll go with me. But I think the point I want to make is, how interesting is this as a way of remembering, hey, we kind of have it pretty good. Like there are kids and women and men in other countries that will never know, that may take their own life, or will find out in a country that's so behind or so culturally different that they'll be outcast at best. So, there's an extraordinarily rich experience of being an autistic person on planet Earth, and I just want that to be something people will remember. And I say that to myself. Don't preach, Orion. These people this might be saving their life by not saying it. I guess from our point of view, we're talking on our own experiences. From your point of view, it changed your life good and bad, or did it just change your life good? Finally finding out who you are and knowing, and was there good and bad things?
It really changed my life for good. And that's when you were talking about practical versus psychological therapy. Having a meltdown or being insecure because I don't understand what's going on socially around me. If you're believed to have a psychiatric issue, then we're talking about my childhood and my past. And, my parents have been kind of blamed unfairly for a lot of my my challenges. I don't want to say shortcomings. I've always had problems with managing, executive functioning skills. So I tend to underestimate how much time and money I have. Now that I know that I underestimate, I can kind of, make room for myself. But I remember my husband and my father getting blamed because I was so bad with money. They're like, oh, you enable her. They weren't enabling me to overspend or anything. And it wasn't a psychological problem that I was having. It was just dealing with executive functioning skills. It's, the thing is when you can do things a lot easier, like when I went to nursing school, there were very difficult concepts that I tended to pick up quickly, but something like I could not remember for the life of me what a normal blood pressure was. I mean, I do now. That was for whatever reason, just because it was maybe my brain found it boring. Like, why do I have to remember these numbers? Where when we were studying something that was a little bit more difficult, like analyzing some certain types of lab tests, my friends were like, how come you can understand this, but you cannot remember that, this is a normal blood pressure? And I'm like, I don't know why my brain works like that. And that would also make people believe that, oh, you're full of it. You just think you're too good you're not filing the papers in the right file cabinet because you think you're too good for that. You're obviously not stupid because you understand these very complex concepts. And
you're underestimated or you're overestimated. That's the issue. Where depending on the day of the week,
yes, exactly. Yeah. Underestimated and overestimated. I was a psychiatric and chemical dependency nurse. Now I went to school for that. So you are taught, what do people with addictions, how do they behave? How does their brain work? How do people with schizophrenia, how does their brain work? So I'm studying this stuff. Nobody gave me a class on the subtle social nuances of the neurotypical in their natural habitat. There is no class for that. So if I'm missing social
we're just supposed to know, even with a different brain. We're just supposed to know. It's like we're actually doing all the work. We actually have to do a lot of work to live on this planet. That's the thing, right?
Yes, it's exhausting.
What's really interesting about the parenting thing you said, and that's a great point. You can absolutely blame your parents for genetics, right? That's their fault. They should take responsibility. But parenting cannot cause autism. You are born autistic and you die autistic. And this is still a thing, right? People think bad parenting or cold parenting, they call them refrigerator parents, believe it or not, can cause autism. It doesn't. You're not good or bad with time or executive function because your parents didn't teach you or your partner's, doesn't rein you in. No, it's because your brain's different. Now, of course, you can have, as we say, practical therapies to help you, and you have. But yeah, so that is the difference. And that's a lot of times, if we're talking about women, late diagnosed women who aren't diagnosed yet, they're probably now feeling like not only are they a failure at that, but they're a failure at making their kids understand it. And now they're a double failure, right? So that's where it can be really distressing for women, potentially at a greater extent than some men, because they feel like they have that extra burden, that kind of maternal burden. So you mentioned your career and the things that you've done. Being undiagnosed and being diagnosed, I get aside from like it being a bit of paper or people knowing,
right?
How's it been going? I mean, you say you're writing again, which tells me that you like me, you're hiding in a room. But how is it? How have you found it? As I guess what I'm saying is there are women out there who might be in the workforce and it can be hard, right? But if they get a diagnosis, they're going to go, well, how's it going to make it better? It'd probably make it worse, right? So what's your experience with regards to before and after, and how it helps or impacts your workplace or your career aspirations?
Right. Well, I didn't know what I needed help with before. I just knew I was struggling. Once I realized what my real problem was, I started talking to a manager of mine, and luckily she actually had a grandchild who was on the spectrum, so she understood exactly what I was struggling with. And then, like I said, now that I'm not like, if I'm having a meltdown, we're not like analyzing my childhood anymore. It's now, okay, let's break up every little aspect of your life and see what could be making you feel overwhelmed right now. What's happening right now in your life, instead of, because there's this understanding now that I don't always process what's upsetting me right away, where in the past it was, oh, well, you're freaking out because you're insecure because you were raised by parents who did this, that, and the other thing. And it's like, no, actually,
noise and lights. It's just the noise and the lights. That's all. It's just the noise and the lights.
But it was also, like I had some delayed reactions. I had a couple different things going on one week. Like my husband was going out of town for a business trip. Some money that was supposed to come into my bank account wasn't there, and I didn't know why. And it was basically because I had missed some executive fund. I was supposed to check a box and hit submit, So like I was freaking out because I didn't have the money. But, all these things were happening earlier in the week. And then on Thursday, I was on the phone with my therapist, and I just broke down and cried. I said, I feel awful. I don't know why I feel awful. And where in the past, like I said, it would have been, well, let's talk about your mother and your father and your, whatever. It was, let's break up the different aspects of your life and see what might be overwhelming you. And then by the end of the thing, she said, see, you're actually doing really good. That's a lot of stuff. Then at work,
that's a really important thing to make, though, don't you think? The distinction is it's not external. You have a different brain. It's internal. It's how my brain is experiencing the world around me. So it's not so much. It's not so much. You can't just blame past life or whatever. But it is external things. But it's external things that are just interacting, and being experienced by my brain differently. It's not that there's a trauma there. It's just that my brain is being oversensitized or overstimulated by this person or that light or that sound or this stress or this task. Yeah, so I guess that understanding that diagnosis, that helps.
Yeah, and now I know what to ask for. If I need certain accommodations at work, I'm not going to try to work in a cubicle with all these phones ringing, everyone's talking. And that's another thing. My voice is really loud. And in that kind of office setting, people would just get so annoyed with me. They think I'm yelling. And that's just my voice.
That's classic. That's just classic autism. That's classic autism. It's a normal thing. We don't understand the volume of our own voice, but then we're the first person to tell someone to shut up. So that's just classic autism.
Yeah. But it's even like I feel like I can either focus on what I'm trying to say, or I can focus on the volume of my voice. So which one do you want right now? Like, do you want me to?
Yeah, exactly.
I know what kind of accommodations I would need.
It's so valuable, right? To know that and to be able to ask for them. The downside is actually getting the employer to implement them, of course. But the ability to, hey, you're obviously a very kind of authentic, unique woman. But did you realize, oh my God, I was wearing a mask? Like, did you realize, oh, I thought I wasn't, but I was actually wearing a mask. And now I've got this diagnosis. I'm trying to work out how to take it off and what is and what isn't the mask and what's me. Did you experience the trauma of unmasking? Can you tell us a bit about that experience?
Yeah, I'm still processing that. There's still part of me, you know, I look at pictures of myself when I was like 4 or 5 years old, and I'm just kind of, you know, I just kind of look somewhere along the line, especially being a woman, you know, I mean, you don't have to be on the spectrum to get that, you know, you look a lot prettier if you smiled, or that kind of crap. I mean, most women, but for somebody on the spectrum, I just found myself, I mean, really early in life, like when I was really young, you would see someone who just seemed to be being treated better than most people. This person is everyone's doll, or, oh, she's a sweetheart. I would find myself copying their hair, copying their dress, because I'm like, well, if I can be more like that person, maybe they'll treat me as nicely as they treat little Katie. I'm would just miss these things, you know, like I remember one day in school, the teacher was talking about, she was reading a book, so we were all supposed to be sitting down and quiet. But, you know, I had been taught, well, nice girls smile and they say hello to people when they walk in the room. So another teacher walked in the back door and I got up to give her a hug and I got screamed at, you know, and all the other kids knew that they weren't supposed to get out of their chairs. But I, for some reason, didn't realize that. And so I kind of got labeled as, you know, I didn't follow directions, I was hyper or whatever. Another thing that would happen is if everyone was talking right before the bell rang, and I'm talking to someone, the bell would ring. I wouldn't even hear the bell ring. I'm just finishing my conversation. Next thing I know, everyone's laughing because I'm the only one talking, and the teacher's sending me out in the hallway for being disruptive. And the shame. But, you know, so the masking kind of starts where you're trying to copy what other people who are not getting in trouble are doing.
It starts young. There's no question about that. It starts really young. And the mental impact on children is horrific. Trust me. Yeah. Like I got an 8-year-old. He's been masking for years. Just to get through to, you know, friends in school. And that's what people don't understand, the mental impact. But then I think there's a new mental impact for adults like us, and that is the mental impact of unmasking.
Yes. And that's where I'm like, I'm looking at pictures of myself before I started masking and still trying to figure out who that person would be if I didn't feel the need to constantly, you know, I look normal right now, but I'm masking. I'm going to, you know, when we're done with this talk, I'm going to go take a nap. You know, I'm going to go need to like snuggle up with my dogs and sort of like chill. But
I'm the same, right? I'm the same. We feel the same. This is normal because this takes a lot of energy.
It does.
People think, oh, you can't be autistic. You're doing a YouTube channel or whatever. You don't understand. This is a small fraction of a thing. But before I let you go, what I would ask you, and it's also, you can also continue the unmasking. Okay, so let's say you're like me. You're an adult. You could be a man, a woman. You could be whatever you want to be. It doesn't. Whatever you want to be is fine. But what I'm trying to say is, oh man, Leslie, this sounds like a lot of. I mean, I've got a husband, I've got a wife, I've got kids, I've got a job, I've got pets. It sounds like this is a rabbit warren I don't want to go down. Like, what's the point? If I've made it in life, why bother kind of going down this rabbit hole or getting this bit of paper, or, you know, what's the benefit of unmasking if all you're saying is how debilitating and tired it can make you, or, you know, like, what do you say to those women? What do you say to those adults?
You know, I feel that by understanding really who I am and what my strengths are versus what my challenges are, I am able to create a much easier life for myself where I can really focus on the things that I'm good at and that make me happy, instead of spending all this time wondering what the hell's wrong with me. I mean, I remember 2 instances in my life. When I graduated from college, my dad was out of town. I had like a meltdown a couple days after my graduation. I called him and I said, I don't know how to be an adult. And he kind of laughed. Oh, you're young. You'll figure it out. You know, not realizing like it was deeper than just a person graduating from college. And then around my 50th birthday, I remember saying to my husband, I don't know how to be a 50-year-old woman. He goes, what do you mean you don't know how to be a 50-year-old woman? You know, and when I look back at those two moments, like that was suddenly I didn't know how to mask anymore. What a waste. What a waste of energy, you know, to be just spending all this time trying to figure out how to fit in. And that's, again, where the misdiagnoses come in, because the doctors are like, oh, you care about what people think too much, what they think about you. And it's not that I care what they think about me, but I got to live with people in the world. I got to live with other human beings. I have to work with them. I have to make money. And if I'm constantly getting on people's nerves and not knowing why, or having these embarrassing meltdowns and not knowing why, it really makes it hard for you to live the life that you want to live and live the best life that you can live. You're just constantly, I felt like I was drowning, is really how I felt. Like I was just keeping my head up over the water, you know, but, you know, drop one thing and I was going to drown. I feel like it's important to trust yourself. If you have been in psychiatric care your whole life and you're getting your diagnoses are getting more and more stigmatizing, and you're not feeling like your life is improving, then you might be on the spectrum.
And I think that's really interesting too, is that everyone I talk to through my channel, you know, whether they're in their 30s, 40s, 50s, I've never heard one person say, you know, oh, thanks so much for your videos and I've sorted assessment and I've been diagnosed. I've never heard one person say, it's the worst day of my life. Like everyone is so relieved and so happy and so excited about finally being able to live their life. And you know, you say that you don't feel like an adult or a 50-year-old woman. Well, I would say that's because you're in your 30s. There's no way you're anywhere past in your 30s. But seriously, from my point of view, you know, I still don't know how to be an adult or a husband or a dad. I'm doing these things, but I still feel like an imposter.
Yes.
And I think understanding why you feel like that through a diagnosis can be really beneficial and helpful. It's been so great chatting, Leslie, and hopefully people watching are getting a really great insight into late diagnosed women. And I think it's such an important conversation to have. So thank you for being so open and honest. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for your channel. It has given me a lot of hope, and I just feel more comfortable with myself. Like hearing another person say, you know, this is what I've struggled with, and this is a thing. It's like, oh, I'm not crazy. Thank God I'm not nuts, and I'm not alone. And that's another thing. I think being on the spectrum, you feel like you're alone a lot. Alone in a crowd is something that I felt a lot. And just understanding why is a relief. It's a relief.
Yeah. Well, it was great to find you. Great to connect with you. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me on your show. Really appreciate it.
Regardless of your circumstances, if you're an adult thinking about the idea of an assessment for autism, if maybe you are newly diagnosed or you're still on the fence, well, I hope this video has helped you and opened up conversations. If it has, make sure you share the video with your family and friends. I really do appreciate your support. Thank you so much for watching. Until my next video, hit that subscribe button and we'll talk soon.